believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? What's up? Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. So, of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Brendas, also known as Ricky Brands, and a great episode for you today. Today, we have two amazing guests with amazing stories. One is a best-selling author who is a regular on Larry King, Oprah. He was also featured in the very popular documentary, The Secret, and he shares this amazing story about being on top of the world. Then, due to a tragic accident that happened at one of his retreats, he ended up doing time in prison. And we discussed how he rebuilt his life and all the things he's learned throughout this crazy journey. And the person I'm referring to is James Arthur Ray. And then the second guest is his wife, Bersabeh Ray, who equally has a interesting and fascinating journey from escaping Iran to dealing with addiction, then eventually also having to escape an abusive relationship. Together, they have a new book called God, Money, and Sex, Understanding and Mastering the Three Human Dilemmas. And as you can guess, we talk about their journeys, the book, and everything in between. It's a super fascinating conversation. I know you guys are going to enjoy this. But of course, as I always have to remind you, if you get some value out of these discussions and guests I bring to you, please consider giving some value back. It doesn't have to be financial. Like I always remind you guys, you can rate, review, tell people about the show, post the show anywhere and everywhere. It's about getting these conversations out there. But if you are in a good financial situation, please consider giving some value back financially if you can. There's plenty of ways of doing so. You can send a one-time donation via Venmo, PayPal. You can support us on Patreon, and that's one of the best ways of supporting us. And if a small percentage of the people who listen and watch the Ripple Effect Podcast supported the show with as little as $1 a month, I could easily do the show full time. So think about it. You're not going to notice $1 being gone every month, but that small contribution goes a long way and could change the path of the Ripple Effect Podcast and personally change my life, of course, because as you know, I hope to be able to do this show full time eventually. We also have an amazing merch store with tons of new logos and designs, so please check out therippleeffectpodcast.com for all these links. And if you want to go directly to the merch store, go to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. But typically, whatever platform you're listening or watching this show, you can find all these links in the show description. Let me also remind you guys that I co-host another show called The Union of the Unwanted, with my dear friends Charlie Robinson from the Macroaggression Show, Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat Podcast, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM Show. It's a roundtable discussion show. We bring in tons of different podcasters, content creators, thinkers, philosophers, researchers, authors, and bounce ideas off one another and talk about current events, historical events, and much, much more. So if you're interested in those type of discussions, definitely check out theunionoftheunwanted.com for more information. And that's it, guys. Enjoy this amazing conversation, and I'll talk to you guys on the next one. Peace.
You're evidently talking about Bersabeh when everybody knows who you are.
Right.
And,
I think he's talking about you. That would be you.
So I guess I'll start.
You go first.
You mentioned before we began to start in our early life, and so if I like to condense my story, I've probably, Ricky, lived 10 lifetimes in one lifetime. And I mean that literally. It hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy at all, but I'm really grateful for it. I think anybody should be grateful for that, because I'm never going to come to the end of life and look back and say, oh, that was boring. You know, there's just so many things that I've been through. I've had epic rises. I've had incredible crashes. I've been sought after world over. I've worked with over 1 million people from 147 countries around the world. I've been crucified by the media and been in the target of a weaponized justice system. I've made tremendous amounts of money and become famous, and then I've become infamous and lost it all. And so I've kind of been on a very, very crazy ride, and I'm totally grateful for it. I really am. And so, if we talk about origins, my father was a Protestant minister, and he was very dynamic, very charismatic, very overbearing. In fact, he was tough on me. And at the time, I really felt like he was too tough. But in retrospect, I feel very, very grateful for how tough he was on me. I was a introverted, bullied, picked on young kid who felt very insecure and lived in a household of a dynamic, charismatic Protestant minister. And so you can kind of imagine how that unfolded. And so I lived the majority of my early life in my bedroom, sequestered away, studying everything I could get my hands on. I was horrible in sports. I was skinny, scrawny, uncoordinated, gangly, buck teeth, and the whole
Glasses with the tape.
glasses
right in
with
the
a
middle.
tape, the whole ugly works. And so I
wish I
thought
had a picture.
if I could figure, she does have a picture somewhere. I thought if I could figure out how the universe worked, that I could apply it to myself, and then I could maybe make my life better. And so I studied literally every great spiritual tradition. My father was a Protestant minister, so I grew up heavily steeped in Christianity, which I have a tremendous respect for. And yet then I branched out when I was 18 years old and started studying Buddhism in the house of a Protestant minister, which kind of tells you I was weird. And I was right in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the buckle of the Bible Belt, which is right down the street from Oral Roberts University. And so it was kind of bizarre that I was attracted to those things, but I wasn't getting the answers that I was asking in my traditional religious Sunday school and from the teachers. And so I studied all these great spiritual traditions. I studied psychology, physiology, quantum physics, believe it or not, biology, all these things. And I was looking for common threads. And I found them. There are common threads through all of these things. And so as I started to apply those in my life a little bit at a time, my life started to turn around, and I started to feel more confident in myself, and my I wasn't so withdrawn and so insecure in my career. My early career at AT&T, I was there for 13 years, and I was in a sales position, and I jetted to the top of that, and then ended up going to become a national sales trainer for AT&T, and then eventually ended up at AT&T School of Business as a C-suite consultant, working with CEOs and presidents and VPs on things like performance, team performance, presentation skills, all these kinds of things, team building, that communication that they were looking to build within their organization. And I left and started my own company in 92, which seems like eons ago, and struggled for a long time, really wrestled for a long time, hand to mouth. And if you're an entrepreneur listening today, you can maybe relate to what I call entrepreneurial solitaire. I played that all the time. That's where you take all your credit cards and you throw them out on the bed and try to figure out which one still has a balance on it so you can continue for another month, hopefully. And that's kind of how my life was, hand to mouth for a long time. Until 2006, I was invited, and there was a lot of times where I felt like throwing in the towel. I literally did. Am I giving you too much information here,
Should he stop?
Ricky?
Give
No,
you.
no, I keep talking as long as you'd like. People are used to hearing me talk, so this is a nice change.
Okay. All right. So just you got me on a roll, and I'll do my best to condense, but I felt like throwing in the towel many, many times, and I think every entrepreneur knows that feeling, and you probably do too, Ricky. I mean, it's a tough road, and you feel very alone a lot of the times, and no one seems to understand you. And then in 2005, maybe six, I was in a mastermind group, and I was approached by a producer who approached all of us and said she had this vision for a documentary called The Secret, which many of your viewers may have heard of. And she wanted to talk about what was called the law of attraction. Well, the law of attraction was such a minute portion of the things that I taught or talked about. I was primarily raised in business and entrepreneurship. And yet I did also study a lot of the ancient traditions and the esoteric thought. And so I said, well, yeah, I can talk about that. And so long story short, The Secret, if you'll remember, went gangbusters worldwide. And I was one of the few people, they interviewed several of us, and I was one of the few that was blessed to have been picked to be in that movie. And so it really it defined me in a sense, which was kind of confining because that really wasn't who I was. And it wasn't the way it was presented, Ricky, quite frankly, I didn't fully agree with. I believe most of my best material, they filmed me for 3 hours. And most of my best material ended up on the cutting room floor because the vision of the producer, Rhonda Byrne, who turned out to be a great friend, was to put together something that was palatable for the masses. And at that point in time, it was really attractive to, well, if you think about it, it'll happen. Well, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. And if you've tried it, you know, it just doesn't work that way. And so I was thrust into this arena in a good way. It got me on Oprah and Larry King and the Today Show once a month for multiple months running. My business quadrupled, and it just blew up in a great way. And so I'm grateful for that. And yet I was the guy constantly saying in the media, okay, wait a second. It's not just about what you think about. You have to do something. Let's remember that 60% of the word attraction is action. And you've got to take some action. You've got to get into the game. And I had that business background to fall back upon that wasn't quite so spiritually soft, if you will, to try to put a nice label on it. And so anyway, I was very, very sought after because of that, because I was practical. And then it all blew up, I in a good way first and then in a bad way. In 2006, I asked God to bless me and help me expand my reach worldwide and to be able to do a bigger kind of work in a positive way. Well, now all of a sudden, here's The Secret came, and I was doing live events, and there was always at least 2,000 people in the room. I mean, it was crazy, and I was on the road over 250 days a year, and it was just nonstop. Everyone wanted a piece of me. And then in 2009, it all fell apart. And if anyone is familiar with what happened in 2009, my team, my company, and I were conducting a 5-day deep dive retreat in the desert of Sedona, Arizona. And we had done that for 5 years prior. And prior to that, everything had gone well. And we assumed it would go well in 2009. Well, it didn't. Something went horribly wrong. And it was a 5-day deep dive into the drivers, Ricky, of what drives our behavior and our results. The results that you produce have very little to do with your marketing. They have very little to do with your sales. They have very little to do with any of those your influence skills. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but the things that drive your behavior are not external, they're internal, if that makes sense to you. And so it's those values, beliefs, assumptions, expectations that you have inside of you that tell you, oh, I can't do that. Or maybe I can, but maybe I'm not good enough, or whatever. And so we were diving deep into those kind of limiting, unresolved emotional issues, we call them. And that's the work that Bersabeh and I still do today, because psychology tells us 95% of what you do on a daily basis is driven by your unconscious mind. 95%. So that means 5% of your cognitive capacity is driving your behavior and your results. 95% is completely out of your awareness. Now, here's the rub. You can't deal with something you're unaware of. Does that make sense to you? And so one of the greatest things that you and I can do is to make the unconscious conscious. And when you make the unconscious conscious, then you're able to observe that, and you're able to say, oh, that's what's holding me back. And I can heal it and embrace it and integrate it and literally set myself free. And that was the objective of the entire week. Well, we had an experience or learning activity at the end of the week. So it was a very long week. We were working long hours. And at the end of the week, we had a sweat lodge. And it was an opportunity to go into a difficult, physically difficult environment where people would push up against all of their limiting beliefs and assumptions. And we told them it would be hot and it would be crowded and you're shoulder to shoulder and it's pitch black. And we told all these individuals these things. And so they went into the sweat lodge, and every single year once it was done, people came out and felt victorious. Well, something went horribly wrong in 2009, and we now know what it is that went wrong. I ended up getting indicted. I'm jumping ahead, but I was charged with a crime by the state of Arizona. They said it was intentional harm, which is manslaughter. And so did we lose you? We okay?
No, it was just my daughter walked in the studio and
Oh, those kids.
Hi.
Okay. So they ended up charging me with manslaughter. Three people lost their lives in that lodge that day.
Yeah.
And it broke my heart. It literally broke my heart. Any thinking individual, Ricky, knew it was a horrible accident. And yet Arizona charged me with a crime. They saw, here's this guy from Beverly Hills with a 7,500 square foot estate on Mulholland Drive in Beverly Hills, and he's worth north of 20 million, and he's all over the media. And boy, won't this make a sensational kind of trial? And so that's what happened. And I got indicted. I lost everything, and everybody who loved me instantaneously turned on me. Now, we hired a doctor from Harvard University who went through 4,000 pages of medical evidence, and he stated conclusively under oath that what caused the deaths was pesticides. And the property owners swore under oath, testified under oath, that they didn't use pesticides, but they perjured themselves because some of their employees said, oh, yes, we do use pesticides. And so if you know anything about pesticides, they're toxic in the human system. People were foaming at the mouth. They had dilated pupils. The state said I made it too hot. Nobody was in the lodge. Nobody had a thermometer. They were saying in trial that I zoomed it up over 220 degrees. And that was pure sensationalism because no one was there and no one had a thermometer. And yet the doctor said it was pesticides. And so long story short, I was acquitted of manslaughter because they couldn't find one shred of evidence for intentional harm. There wasn't. It was a horrible accident. It broke my heart. And yet there was a lesser inclusive, which is part of our so-called justice system, that was called negligence. And they charged me with negligence, and I ended up not only losing three people that I loved and cared about in the sweat lodge, but I lost my home. I lost my Inc. 500 company, and it took me 20 years to build. I lost my life savings. I lost my freedom. I went to prison for 2 years. Everyone who was supposedly my friend, with literally a couple of exceptions, turned their back on me and walked away. And so you learn a lot through those kinds of things. And that was the dark night of the soul for me. If you're familiar with Joseph Campbell's work, he talks about the hero's journey. And, the hero starts off with a big vision and a big idea, and then he has to fight dragons and demons and go through the dark night and hopefully survive and emerge on the other side. And that's what happened in 2013 is when I met Bersabeh. I had just gotten out of prison and I was $20 million in debt. I was 54 years of age. I was in horrible physical condition. This was just what 11 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know which way to turn, and I didn't know what to do next. So I had to really dig deep and figure out what is James Arthur Ray 3.0 going to be? What's the next chapter of my life going to be? So that's you asked for the story. You got it. I did my best to abbreviate, but there's so much to it. I'll throw it back to you.
No, you hit on so many important topics that we talk about in the show. I mean, so much of what influences our decision making and what we do is subconscious. I mean, you can go from documentaries like Century of Self, even Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, Richard Grove's Psychology of Control documentary. And all this stuff kind of hits on Edward Bernays and understanding of, our subconscious and how you can motivate or influence people's decision making. There's a great Canadian documentary. I had somebody on years ago it was called The Corporation, which went into all the ways that corporations use this science and psychology to get people to buy stuff, and how back in the day, when we were growing up, if you're trying to sell a car, you talk about how good the suspension is, how it brakes, all these type of things. And then they understood that it's not about this physical thing, but it's about the feeling it gives you, so it's like, so you sell this idea of how people are going to look at you when you buy the product, how
Right.
the feeling it gives, I always use the example of like GM, for example. General Motors has Chevy, they have Cadillac, they have but completely different marketing campaigns. When you see a Chevy pickup truck commercial, it's a deep voice, much like you sound today. Voice, kind of like you hear it and you're like, oh, this is somebody who gets his hands dirty, kind of a blue collar type of guy. So when I'm buying a truck, I'm not just buying a pickup truck. I'm buying that image, that feeling that like I want people to think I'm gritty and I get my hands dirty and I'm blue collar. And then you get a Cadillac commercial, same, company, General Motors, and they have a guy in a suit, they have a guy with a luxury watch going into, looks like an expensive home or a hotel or whatever, and that's the image. So, like you said, so much of our decision making we think is conscious, but so much of it is subconscious, and they use
Right.
techniques for all types of propaganda to sell us wars, to sell us ideas and worldviews. So without a doubt, it's really important for people to understand that it's almost an unfair fight. And I know we were just interrupted by my daughter recently, like talking about kids. That's what I try to tell parents too. It's like, hey, I know you're mad at your parents for or your kids for not being able to put the tablet down, or not to be, not being able to get off YouTube, but they're fighting a unfair fight. They have
Yes.
psychologists, they've hired scientists. They know exactly how to keep your kids addicted to those products and those videos and those apps. There was a story about, I forget which big tech company built a fake casino that they used just for research, and they were trying to figure out like how much how many rewards you have to give people to keep them playing a game, how many times they can lose, like all these things. And it looked like a real casino. People would go into the casino, but it was used and built just for research reasons. And
Wow.
so that type of stuff happens all the time. And Silicon Valley is one of the biggest employers of psychologists and scientists now in these fields for that reason. So it is something to be wary about, and something that people need to just understand that, what you see on TV, there's certain colors and certain songs and certain sounds, and everything is thought out, and politics is no different, right? I mean, they have speech writers, they have people who are helping mold a image, so sometimes you're like, oh, I really like that guy, or I don't really like this person, and it's like, yeah, but we don't even know if that's really the person that we like or dislike. We don't even know if that's really them,
Right.
so but in regards to your time in prison, one thing, I had Jack Abramoff on years ago. I know when he came out of prison, he had a lot of alone time and time to reflect, and other guests have been in that situation where you're stuck with your thoughts. It's like all you have is time to, to basically ponder. And what was that experience like being alone with your thoughts? Like how much of your life how much of your time did you spend just like reflecting? And do you look at that experience as like a positive, a positive experience because of that? Because you were forced
Nothing.
to have to put your life on pause and reflect on your whole journey till then.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, do you guys?
I apologize.
Oh, it's all right.
that it looked really animated and really good, but you cut out. I don't know. Speak to me, Ricky. Can I hear you now?
Yeah, well, I'm
No, we still don't
You
have
don't
you.
have him?
Yeah.
I
No.
have him. That's strange.
it must be his earpiece.
Let me see.
Unconsciously, how unconsciously we are programmed through the media, through our advertising, through everything, quite frankly, and how we make decisions based upon those things. So then you went and I missed the rest of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't remember what I was talking about either. But the secret in that, for people who didn't watch that documentary, I think I like you said, I think that maybe the power of visualization and just wanting something can kind of it can be an issue if you only think that feeling it or thinking it or imagining it will make it happen alone. Obviously, that's not the case. Like you said, you have to be proactive. But I do think that there is a lot to, one of my favorite quotes is, if you change the way you look at things, what you look at changes, right? So
Hmm.
when I'm tired in the morning and I don't feel like going to the gym or going to work, I'm sore, I'm tired. I can either look at it as like, I can start making excuses like, oh, I need more sleep, no, or I can say, hey, man up, go get to the gym. Like, you're gonna feel better, you're not gonna regret it. And so it's like nothing physically in the physical world changed, but the way I was looking at it has changed. I use sports as an example. It's like if Cristiano Ronaldo is taking a penalty kick, you could see the look in his face that he's so confident that he's going to score, and he has zero of just anxiety or doubt. And then you put somebody else, a young player, and same ball, same size goal, everything, same situation, and they're afraid. And it's like the situation hasn't changed. It's how you're looking at it. The reason why he's successful or more successful than the average player is because he's already told himself he's going to succeed, So there is a lot to that. And I'm sure, some of these exercises, mental exercises, and obviously when you're in prison, you do a lot of talking to yourself. But having these conversations are important, right? And I'm sure they were important in your journey.
Critically important. It reminds me of Viktor Frankl. If you're familiar, he was imprisoned in Auschwitz during World War II, and he saw some horrendous things. And he said the one thing, and this is not a direct quote, but this is the feeling of the quote. He said the one thing that we have the absolute freedom to do that can never be taken away is to choose our response to external circumstances. And so I know when I first went to prison, I was angry. I was really angry. I mean, the justice system had been misused, and that's a fact. It had been weaponized and come after me. And as I said, there had been deaths, and I'm not minimizing because it literally broke my heart. I cared
Yeah.
about those people, and I wouldn't ever begin to minimize that. And I certainly wish it didn't happen. And yet, there had been deaths in numerous sweat lodges before, and not one of them had ever been prosecuted as a crime, not ever. And so I really was bitter and I was angry. And I remember the first month I was in solitary confinement right next to death row because I guess I was so dangerous. Who knows? But nonetheless, I was angry at life. I was angry at the justice system. I was angry with God, quite frankly. And I said, as I sat there in my cell in a 10 by 12, no books, no pad of paper, no phone, obviously, no window, right next to death row, guys yelling and cursing all the way up and down the run. And I said, I've invested my entire life in trying to help people. What a joke. This is my reward. And then it was like God said to me, "Oh, so you did it for a reward?" And I thought, wow, okay, that's kind of sobering, because why do you do what you do? Do you do it because you want to be rewarded, or do you do it because it's the right thing? And if you do the right thing, then the reward is inherent in doing the right thing, if that makes sense to you. And so, boy, that really hit me like a two by four. And I said, but why me? And again, the voice came back to me. Why not you? Do you think you're special? Do you think you should be protected? Do you think you should not have to go through difficulties? Because look throughout history. If you look throughout history, and I believe I mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier. I'm a big admirer of his work. But he talks about the hero's journey, and every single individual, and name the name: Moses, the Christ, Job, Plato, Socrates, whose life was taken, Seneca, whose life was taken. Any great hero
Even
throughout.
people now,
Pardon me.
people now in the modern times too.
Yes, go ahead.
Like Elon Musk. You got
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump being attacked. People who are telling the truth. RFK Jr. that's been doing it for years on health and so forth. I mean, none of them have had an easy life. People who try to do the right thing and tell the truth always get attacked.
Yeah, it was Plato who said, "No one is more hated than he who tells the truth," and I think that's very self-evident in today's world. People who tell the truth. We've been canceled 3 times on social media, uh,
Starting
on
over.
Instagram and Facebook, and we're just stubborn enough. We're not going to quit. We just keep coming back.
No.
Are you guys
But
on Twitter or are you on X? Because I thought I looked and are you guys on Twitter?
we're on
Yeah.
X. Yes, we're
Okay.
definitely on X, and that's
One of
He's
the
on there,
and
but
that's
he's
that's
shadow banned.
I think
there.
I'm still shadow banned on X.
with
Um,
some of that issues. There's I know Alex Jones and some other people talked about how when they came back to X that there was some type of somebody had programmed some shadow banning that even like the new employees that were working at X that were not shadow banning people couldn't find. It was like some backdoor way,
Right.
like not making it obvious that they were, suppressing certain things. And I've had Zach Voorhees on, who was the Google whistleblower. He talked about this too, how Google did the same thing. And yeah, that is issue. That's one of the biggest issues of our time because the thing is, our opinions and perspectives are all molded by the information we have access to. If you control the information, you control our opinions and perspectives. And that's
right.
what's his name? Dr. Robert Epstein, who's been on my show too, who has done tons of great research on how Google can manipulate elections and to manipulate worldviews. And there's a great YouTube video called "Free is a Lie." It's a couple minutes of this tech guy, talking about, you get this Pixel, this Google phone, or you use Google Maps, or you use all these free services, but he's like, they're not free. Free is a lie. He's like, you're giving up all this information. And he goes into, I don't know if it was a Facebook study or it might have been a Facebook study where they could predict a divorce before you publicly, announced it. They could predict
Wow.
you dating somebody or marrying somebody before you publicly announce it, just by all the metadata, like who are you hanging out with, who are you taking pictures with the facial recognition, where are you going, how negative or positive your posts are. So you take all that information that you're basically openly sharing with, the platform, and then they can use that to manipulate you, understand you, and push you in any directions. There's also an older documentary called "Terms and Services May Apply," which is really good. It's, a little bit older and kind of ahead of its time, but talked about how nobody reads that stuff, and it's not accidental. Like they purposely use language that is difficult to understand. They purposely use fonts and font sizes that are difficult to read. And just for and they make it purposely long, just so you go, I'm not going to read all this. Let me just click yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's all well thought out. And so yeah, that's a huge. I got kicked off YouTube during COVID, so I'm with you. Thank God for Rumble and other platforms.
Yeah.
They can at least give you a place where you can upload information and share different perspectives and whatnot. But yeah, I mean that those platforms, X is very much required. Rumble, like all these, and being a somebody who's been a business owner, how important it is to have competition, because if not, then you have a monopoly, and then they control whatever they want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, there's so much. That's such a deep hole we could go down. I mean, it's proven that just hours after Biden was sworn in, that he and the FBI, excuse me, he and the FBI went to open back doors into the social media platforms so that they could have manipulation there, and that's RFK talks about that, and so it's quite an interesting world in which we live, and it was a hard pill to swallow for me. I was an American boy. I was raised in America. I was told that I had rights. We have the Constitution. If the media tells you something, it's true. The government has your best interest at heart. And so it was very difficult for me going through what happened in 2009, 10, and on to swallow how much of that was just untrue. There was a time in there were 32 counts of prosecutorial misconduct in my trial. 32 counts. Well, one count of prosecutorial misconduct is grounds for a mistrial. There was no mistrial. There was a Brady violation. The state was caught suppressing evidence in my favor, and they were fined for suppressing that evidence, and that's grounds for a mistrial. There was no mistrial. And I mean, I could go on. And so it was just shocking to me, not so much to Bersabeh, who hasn't talked about her upbringing yet, but she grew up in Iran, so she grew up realizing, and I'll let her talk for herself, that the government is not your friend, and they're not on your side, and they don't have your best interest at heart. They have their own interests at heart, and so consequently, we're in a war. We're literally in a spiritual war, and I like to quote Ephesians 6:12, where Paul was talking to the Ephesians. He said, "We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against principalities and powers, against the forces of evil in the world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." And I firmly believe he could have written that for today, because those are the kinds of things. I mean, let's face it. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy said they said 1% of the government employees show up and work a 40-hour week in the office. 1%. And they said they're going to make it mandatory for people to come to work. Well, what did Biden do this week? He passed a new law where everybody can work from home to counteract that before Trump even gets into office. And it just, the rabbit hole is deep. They're not going to go easily. And unfortunately, it's important for all of us as Americans and as God's people to be awake and to pay attention to what's going on.
Well, let's get into your background from Iran, and I'm also a foreigner myself. I was born in Portugal, and so
Oh yeah.
I have a lot of I don't know what it is about us foreigners, but we're attracted to a lot of other foreigners. So I have friends from Estonia, Lebanon, El Salvador, from all over the place. So, but yeah, let's get into a little bit of your upbringing and background, and then maybe we can get into when your roads cross paths, and then we get into the book.
Sure. I was born in Iran, and I was born at a time where the so-called revolution had just taken place, and also when Iran had just Iraq and they both gone to war with each other. I think Iraq started. I'm not sure exactly. Um, so the time that I was born, what had happened so the people started demonstrating and saying that because they wanted democracy in that country. And that was the overthrow of the Shah, thinking that's what they're doing. And it turns out that it happened to be the exact opposite of what they thought that they were demonstrating for and wanted to get the rights for. Because what happened is right when the Ayatollah Khomeini took over, they had the military that was coming into the country. They were not Iranians. These were all people from other places like Palestine and Lebanon and things like that. And it kind of like the same things that you see happening here. We get a lot of illegals coming in here, mostly men from, is it China and the Middle East? And I'm not exactly sure in all the
And
countries.
Mexico. Yeah.
And coming through in Mexico, yeah. So they came into the streets and they started throwing people in prison. They were killing people, raping the women. And what they did was they gave a very hard time to people that were not of the Islam faith. So it was the Baha'is, which is the background that I grew up in, and it was the Christians and the Jewish people that they gave a hard time to. Our family turned out, the military kicked down our door, took my father and threw him in prison. In prison, there was a death sentence. You didn't know if they were ever going to get out. My mother was raped. I experienced sexual abuse. And all these things, besides all of these things, women there don't really have any rights. You can't really have a life, let alone work or get an education. And given your, let's say if you're a Baha'i or Jewish or Christian and say, this is my faith, and you try to go to school or to try to own a business, they either will not allow it or you get a really hard time. You have to hide it. So given everything we went through, we said, there's no place for us to live here. So the parents decided that we need to leave the country. And how you left was you escaped. You couldn't just get up and leave. So we had to pay someone to smuggle us out of the country. And I remember we're leaving and we went, it was middle of the night, through the desert, got in some back of a pickup truck to drive through the desert to be able to cross the border and not get caught. If you got caught, it was death. The sentence was death. And God knows what would have happened to the kids and the women. I'm sure you can imagine what would happen. So we made it to Pakistan. We had to live in Pakistan for 2 years to be able to get our visas, to be able to come to the country legally. I'll say that. It was a hard thing to do, and I'm sure you can relate. When we came to the States, given, you have to work, parents had to work. You okay, sweet?
I'm doing okay. Maybe you should mute me. Oh,
I've got you on mute.
okay, good.
Okay. Sorry, Ricky.
It's choking me up.
So when we came to the States, we didn't speak any English. None of us spoke really any English. So parents had to work from, you can imagine, early morning till middle of the night, and really crummy jobs, not making a lot of money. So we're living in low income neighborhoods, and it was a bad part of area neighborhoods. Parents were never home. So I was raised by the television. One of the ways I learned how to speak English was watching Italian mobster movies. So that was my New York style gangster movies as I learned to speak English. So from there, because of that and the environment that we lived in, and given, whatever we can get into, I'll get into those details a little bit later. I got into a lot of the wrong crowds, hanging out with the wrong people, bad areas of the neighborhood. I got into gang behaviors. It was a drug addiction, alcohol, and you can name it. It was the lowest of lows. And from there, let me see how much I could go forward. So I have a background in not only having traumatic experienced traumas, right? I've experienced the whole addiction and abuse and so forth. So bring all that forward. I someone got my life together to be somewhat normal to be able to say, okay, I'm going to get married and perhaps I can too, create a normal life for myself. And unfortunately, I ended up getting into an abusive relationship where I got married.
Not this one.
Not this one.
Just
Yeah.
want to make that perfectly clear.
Yeah.
Just in case anybody is she's actually here on her own will. She's not forced to be.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I've got her chained to the table here.
Yeah.
You know.
No, not even close. This is like, yeah. So being in that relationship, I had gotten a divorce. I got the courage to get a divorce, and that's a hard thing to do for some people because they end up staying. You think, oh, it's my fault. Maybe there's something wrong with me, and I deserve to get this because of all the background that I had and so forth. But I decided that I'm not gonna do this anymore. And I got a divorce, and I left. And when I got married, I actually lived in Belgium. So I moved from the States to Belgium. And this was around the same time when he went to prison, I got married. Mine was kind of a prison sentence.
Kind of ironic, isn't it?
So I went, and then when he got out of prison is when I got a divorce and came back. But yours was like the trial and 2 years. So it was like a 4-year process, I believe.
Mhm.
And mine was about 4 or 5 year marriage too. So when I came back to the States, I was just trying to put my life, I had to start all over, put my life back together, find a new career and so forth. And I happened to, a friend of mine signed me up for some network marketing thing and said, why don't you, try this and to make some money. And I wasn't really interested. I went to one meeting to see what it was about. And at that meeting, they happened to say, we're having a speaker come from The Secret. They didn't say who. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll go check it out. I almost didn't. So I went and it happened to be him. But at the time, they were filming a documentary on his life called
Enlighten us.
Enlighten Us. And so they came in with a film crew, and I'm looking at him, and he has this long, kind of blonde hair with a goatee. He used to color his hair back then. So I told him, stop it. So, so he comes in, and I'm looking at him. I'm like, he wasn't in The Secret. I don't recognize that guy. And then he smiled and said hello, and I was like, oh, it's the genie guy. I know who
The
he is.
genie guy.
Yeah.
Remembers the genie guy. Your wish is my command.
Yeah, that guy.
Um,
So how we started talking from there was when he went on stage and he was speaking. I've never been to any of these personal development things or experiencing the speakers other than what I've saw in that movie, The Secret. When he was speaking on the stage, it was so raw and real, and it resonated with me because he was talking about, yeah, life is a struggle. It's not easy. Everyone goes through hardships and it's a battle and you're struggling. And when he was doing that, I said, yes, me too. I'm going through the same thing. And there was a presence to him that I really was attracted to in the sense that there was a strong a solidity to him that I wanted that I didn't have. So I reached out to him to work for him. So I worked for him
on Facebook.
On Facebook.
Yeah, on Facebook, no less.
So I reached out to work for him, and we had a couple meetings, and we met, and it happened to work. Well, he couldn't pay me at the time because
I was sleeping on my mom's couch, and I was $20 million in debt and homeless, and
Sure.
and so 54 years of age and in horrible physical condition.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how I was real attractive to Bersabeh, but
Yeah, well, the other part was that home when I went that evening when I went home, I looked him up on Google, and then I started reading all the stuff about what happened, and he's a murderer and this and that, and I thought it didn't align with the person that I met in person. I said there's something wrong here, and given we'll go into what my background is, I said there's something doesn't feel right. So from there, I felt that there's always this injustice done. And I said to myself, I'm going to help him. I'm going to do what it takes to to get the business going. And at the same time, when I started working for him, I mean, he's helped me a lot too, working through all the things that I've gone through. So there's in the things that we do for people now, Ricky, it's if we didn't do it, it would be an injustice because of the fact I have the background in as someone who has gone through the hardships in life. Because what happens when you experience physical abuse, sexual abuse, I mean, just name it, a drug addiction, and so forth, you identify as a person as those things. So you think that's who I am.
Broken.
Broken. I cannot. I'm not capable of having another life because this is who I am. And coming from that perspective, from that life, to be able to be seated where I am now today, it's like it wasn't even in my wildest dreams that I could become this person from that, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and that's what I love about doing the show is having people share these journeys because people can relate to these conversations so often. I forget who said it. Somebody famous, some celebrity who was like, "Yeah, I spend 50 years of my life to be a overnight sensation," right? And it's like the point of that was like everybody sees somebody after they succeeded, they don't see all the failures, right? And
Yeah.
between somebody who succeeds and fails as the guy who succeeds never gave up, and
Yeah.
going. And s- so much of our lives are that, it's just pushing through, learning from our mistakes. And, and this, not to bring it back to social media and the internet again, but, that's why we see this increase in depression with young people because
Right.
you're seeing only the perfect parts of somebody's lives, and many times it's not even real. In California, you're hearing stories of people renting out private jets for like 5 seconds just to take a selfie in it and then post it on their Instagram page so they can kind of mold this persona that I'm a famous
Yeah.
successful person. And so everything you're seeing is fake. So a lot of people look at their lives and it's like, well, I don't really get along with my parents, or me and my sibling don't get along, or financially, I'm insecure and not in a good place. I hate my job. And you're like, wow, nobody else is going through the same things I'm going through. And then it just leads to more and more and more depression. And, I was, as you can tell, I have instruments around me, a lot of them neglected for a while now. But when I was growing up, I was a big into music because it was the one place I could find people who were going through the same things that I was
Mm.
going through. I could relate to it. It's like, okay, I'm not the only one who feels down or depressed or feels empty or unfulfilled. And so I related with that. And that's why sharing these, having people on that are open books, because I'm very much that myself, where like people can ask me anything and I'll talk about just about anything for the purpose of like, hey, you know what? There's going to be somebody out there who's going to relate to this or connect with it, and it can be helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Absolutely. What's really interesting, Ricky, is that we are not bonded through our victories.
Mm.
We're bonded as human beings through our suffering. We really are. And that's what bonds us. The people who have suffered the most potentially. Now, if you give into it and you wallow in it and you allow yourself to move into victim mentality, then God help you. But if you suffer and you refuse to continue to wallow in it and you just keep going, the forces of resistance must give way to he or she who refuses to quit. That's just a fact. They have to give way.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, particularly with younger generations, we had a guy that wanted to come to work for us. And we've had a couple of these examples, younger individuals. And he said, well, I'll give it 18 months. And I said, with all due respect, I don't think you're the right person for our team. And well, why not? 18 months is a long time. No, 18 months is nothing. It's nothing. If you are really committed to doing something, you go until. And he said, until what? I said, until you get it. You keep going until you get what you're going after, or at least a semblance thereof. And that's unfortunate. And a lot of it,
Mm.
we've referenced social media, but a lot of it is this instant gratification. I can pick up the phone and I can have a meal delivered to my home in 30 minutes. I don't have to do anything except sit there and keep watching TV. I can, how many times do all of us watch our computer grind and we're, we're like, come on, this is so slow because we've gotten so used to this instantaneous gratification. Things have to happen right now. Well, the fact is, it takes a minimum. Dr. Anders Ericsson is the expert. Are you familiar with the name? On mastery, what it takes to develop mastery,
Yeah, I
and
heard the name. Yeah, yeah.
and he said it takes a minimum of 10 years. A minimum of 10 years of what he calls deliberate practice. And what that means is that it's 10 years of a minimum of 3 hours a day where your sole objective is to improve, not just do this or do that, but your sole objective is to improve. And it takes a minimum of 10 years. And if you look at like a Leonardo da Vinci, Bersabeh and I do a group mentoring that meets twice a month, every other Thursday night. And we just covered Da Vinci last night. But Leonardo da Vinci, everyone knows who he is. Even young people know who he is. 500 years later. And the reason is because he understood. He worked for his mentor, Andrea del Verrocchio. Now, no one knows who Andrea del Verrocchio is, except maybe me, and maybe you do, but and Bersabeh. But no one's heard of Andrea del Verrocchio. Well, that was his mentor and his teacher, who was a painter as well. But he worked for him as a studio boy, bringing him coffee and sweeping the floors. And in fact, now historians say a lot of Verrocchio's supposed paintings were actually done by Da Vinci because they can tell of the styling, but he didn't get any credit for it. He let Verrocchio take all the credit. He didn't care. He didn't care. He wanted to develop his craft. He wanted to develop mastery. And there's very, very few of us in today's world who are committed at that level to becoming a truly masterful individual. We want the plane, spending money to take a picture in front of a plane. I mean, really? To do what? Impress people that you don't even know that could care less about you on social media? Well, I've got 10,000 friends. No one has 10,000 friends. I'm sorry. They just don't. And so it's really gotten so far away from center. And that's one of the things you mentioned, the new book, and that's one of the things that we talk about it in great detail in God, Money, and Sex, is that we've gotten so far away from center, so far away from morality and virtue and becoming good people. And we're so caught up in trying to make money and to be famous and to get a big following. And, the list is endless. And those things really, from my perspective, when I supposedly was world famous and worth north of $20 million and had this 7,500 square foot estate in Beverly Hills, it was all gone. Ricky, it was gone in 3 months. Gone. So what value did it really have? It really didn't have a lot of value. I thought it did, and I've been conditioned to believe that it did. And I thought all these people who said they loved me really did love me, but they didn't. They loved what I could potentially do for them. And so that's another piece. And I'll just say this and then I'll go back to you. But one of the things that Bersabeh and I are really committed to in our work is helping to create independent thinkers.
Yeah.
Help people think critically and independently. and don't take things at face value and don't buy into all the things you've been told.
Yeah, and I think that starts with the school system. I mean, what we've
Mm,
done is that we've created good factory workers. You know, if people go into the history of the school system, you know, it's basically you're trying to teach a people how to live in a unnatural life, sitting down at a desk 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, not moving until you hear a bell. Like that's unnatural. That's why the whole ADHD is complete horse crap. You know, it's not. I don't believe it at all. Like, if you have a adult who's full of energy, we don't call them sick. We call them healthy. But if we have
yeah.
a kid who's full of energy, we call him sick, and we call the kid who is probably, you know, on his tablet all day at home. So then when they go to school, they can kind of do the same thing. We call him okay. But then the kid who's full of energy and can't sit still or pay attention because what they're given is boring, then, you know, we just have to rethink this whole thing. And it's no different than like the DSM, which they give for, you know, depression, anxiety. Like it's not scientific at all. They use terms like chemical imbalances because it makes it sound scientific, but nobody's testing you for any chemical. Nobody's checking what's in balance or how imbalanced it is. You go in there, you say, hey, I'm depressed. Here's a pill, you know, and it could be just, I mean, that's, you guys have been through a lot in your lives. Like that's a part of life, you know, it's the yin and the yang. You appreciate the good because you've been through some bad. And, you know, you appreciate that cheat day because you've been dieting all week, you know, so that's you take that away from humans and life's not worth living. And but I also think that it's a huge it taps into some of the other things you're talking about in regards to mastery, because I think most people are told, you know, that hey, just do good in school, pay attention, be a rule follower, don't go against the grain, and you'll get a good paying job and you'll be happy. And then so everybody takes this route, everybody takes this road that is supposed to end up at, you know, at happiness, and they're going down this road. They did good in school, they went to the university, they got the white picket fence, they're doing a job that they hate, they're buying material things that, you know, are just temporary you know, satisfactions, and then they're like, I'm not really happy. And then you get all these rich people in these rich communities or celebrities who were looking for happiness in the wrong places. So now they're all addicted to stuff, or they're in broken families or broken relationships. And it's all because you were sold a lie right in the beginning. And
Hmm.
I also think this goes into the whole spiritual thing. I was raised a Catholic. I was, you know, being Portuguese, you know, you go to CCD, you go to Sunday school, you go to church, you know, and but like most kids, I rebelled and went against the grain, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. Every time I ask too many questions, I get in trouble. You know, all these type of things. And then I realized as I got older, I'm like, okay, like there's a need for this, because the truth is, if you don't have a reason to ask these bigger questions, and I know you're intrigued with philosophy, you're a big fan of philosophy. I am too. I love philosophy because I think it if we just get stuck in the grind of like going to work, you know, 40 hours a week, buying things you don't need, going to work, you know, and then just working for the weekend, you go out with your buddies, you have a couple of drinks, you go back to work. It's very unfulfilling. And if you don't have religion or spirituality or philosophy or something that sparks these bigger questions, to put things in perspective, that forces you to zoom out and be like, okay, I'm this rat on this wheel running in place, but like, why are we here? What's my purpose? Am I really fulfilled? Am I really happy? Am I really contributing something, you know, positive to the universe? Like, you know, some people, if they don't have something that forces them to ask those questions, they'll never ask them. They'll just keep doing the same thing every single day and just be,
Sure.
yeah, you know. So I think that's why a lot of what's going on in the world today, it is a war against spirituality. It is a war against, because it's much easier to control people when they're
Mm,
materialistic people, when they're just like,
That's right.
right?
hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a couple things that have come up for me. If I may digress back to the school system, are you familiar with the Rockefeller quote? You know, the Rockefellers built the school system, and Rockefeller said, "I don't want to create thinkers. I want to create good workers." And that about says it all. I want to create people who are going to go to work because I have an objective to fulfill, quite frankly. And so we're not creating people who think for themselves. The people who get rewarded are those who comply. And we saw this in spades particularly if we can inject fear into
Yeah.
individuals. We saw this in spades in 2020 with COVID. Oh my God, I'm going to die. Well, guess what? Yes, so am I, and so are you, and we're all going to die eventually. So just embrace it because it's going to happen. You don't want it to happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen. Oh, but I might die right now. I have to wear a mask. Well, I have to separate myself. And now we know, that all those things were lies. They were absolute lies, and they've been proven to be lies. And there's no scientific evidence behind it whatsoever. But if you can indoctrinate people with fear, then they're going to give away their freedom and they're going to give away their critical thinking and they're going to just comply.
Yeah, but you have to also think like here, I don't know if you can relate to this too, Ricky, is that living in the United States, it's very you don't even have to be in a fear mode to be controlled. The system, the way the system is set up is already controlling the individual. It's creating all the unhappiness, the depression, the anxiety because of how you're putting into this, in your words, the hamster wheel, and you don't know why you're unhappy. It doesn't make sense. They make God sound like, oh, it's ridiculous. You believe in God. Oh, you go, oh, you're religious. Oh, that's weird. I don't, because they've done that. I mean, one of the important things that I did through my cleanup to be able to have somewhat, my ultimate dream was to be able to sit on the couch without needing anything and be perfectly okay. And when you're an addict, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And one of the first things I did was I cleaned up my diet. Like I smoked for 24 years. I finally quit, but instead of numbing myself with something else, I allowed all the problems that I was suppressing with smoking cigarettes come up, and I started dealing with them.
Problems is an easy term.
It's an
Let's call
okay.
them what
I
they
let
are.
hell.
Demons.
I let
She
the,
let the demons come up, and I was here to experience it in full regalia.
It's true.
Uh,
I let the hell come out pretty much. The demons came flying out. And it's true they do. I mean, it's vicious. Anyone who's gone through something like that. And that's what you have to do. You have to allow these things to come up and start facing them and say, what is my, what am I struggling with really? You got to turn off the television. You got to be careful what kind of music you're even listening to. If you've ever listened to the lyrics of some of these so-called popular bands and so forth, all these things are done on purpose here in the United States. Hollywood is absolutely corrupt. And when I turned all these things off, it was like I can hear and see for the first time. With what? With peace inside, and having done the working on the unresolved emotional issues and so forth. What that does, Ricky, is like it's almost like you've left pieces of yourself back in time in the places that you experienced serious trauma. You go back and you take that piece back and you bring it back. And because when you don't, what happens is when you're experiencing anxiety and depression, all these things is because you're fragmented.
it's
Inside of
literally a
you,
piece of your soul is stuck
right.
back in these unresolved emotional issues.
Right. And what happens is that we come to now and we're sitting there, we're like, well, I'm depressed, I have anxiety, I'm not happy, I'm not fulfilled. And when you go inside, it's like it's almost like it's empty. It's so empty and deafening of that silence that it scares the heck out of you to even go in there. So when you start working on yourself, you start bringing all these pieces back. Now all of a sudden you've got this fullness in your center, and we call that, in your heart, which is a seat, the throne of God. And that's what we do. So we get you so that you become whole again, WHOLE, and that's how you take your power back. And when a person is operating from that center and going out into the world, there's nothing that can shake you off of that. And the big first step is to look at, okay, why, when we talk about this, why do I like the things I like? Why do I value the things I value? Are they even mine or were they handed to me? Right?
Nine
So,
times out of 10, what you'll realize
yeah.
when you do that kind of introspection is that the things you think you want is something that someone's told you should want.
Yeah.
It's like your great example. I'll use it again. Let me spend how many dollars to go take a picture in front of an airplane?
Yeah.
For what?
I mean, if you think about that person going and doing that, that's pretty sad. I mean,
Very sad.
I feel sorry for how how they feel inside, because that's not a good place to be. That's not a good place to live life from. Life is so much more than, what your pocketbook can buy you, or the things that you can own. You can't take any of it with you when you leave.
And are you guys familiar with the rat park experiment? That
No, I don't think so.
it's fascinating. I've talked about it. Sorry for listeners who've heard me reference it multiple times on the show, but it's just a really fascinating experiment, and kind of it kind of helps people understand human tendency and some of the causes of addiction and depression. And so they had these rats in a cage, and they put water that had, like, I believe cocaine in water that didn't, and the rat kept coming back to the water with cocaine, eventually died. And they're like, hey, look, this proves that cocaine's addictive, and that's what caused the death. And then these Canadian scientists and psychologists are like, well, one thing we're not taking in consideration is the cage. So let's recreate the experiment, but create a giant rat park. So they took a giant warehouse, they recreated its natural habitat, had places for it to play and eat, and other rats to be around, and did the same thing. One water had cocaine, the other one didn't. The rat came back, or drank the water with cocaine once, went away, never came back. And they're like, oh, what we learned was that we believed that the addiction was caused by the substance. It was a external thing, but it wasn't. It was internal. It was unhappy in the cage. And I say all the time, like, we're pleasure monkeys. We constantly are attracted to people that make us happy, foods that make us happy, exercise because it makes us happy, or whatever it may be. Well, that rat wasn't happy, and that cocaine was giving it a little bit of happiness. But now you give it its, environment where it can find happiness in other places, and boom, it doesn't need
Wow.
it. And I was telling this story, I remember, to a buddy of mine. He's an engineer, and went to college at a UMass, and he was saying, he's like, oh, that makes sense, because he shared a story of him and his buddy being at a party, and they actually were pressured into doing cocaine for the first time. And so they both did it. He did it once. He's like, I never touched it again. He's like, I didn't like it, whatever, this and that. He's like, my buddy kind of became addicted to it. And he's like, and now reflecting on the situation, like, why did he become addicted to it and why I didn't? I was in a good place. He's like, I knew that I wanted to be an engineer. I had a girlfriend. I had a supportive family. He didn't have any of those things. And so maybe, and it makes sense because, and I know Dr. Carl Hart, talks about this too, and kind of throws a curveball into the way we look at addiction. But it's true. Like, if you can just look at and quantify the addictive properties of each thing. People say, oh, this is more addictive than that, and this more addictive than that. Well, how come one person can take that substance and doesn't have the exact same reaction to that person? Then it might not be the substance. It's a internal thing. And I think many of us, that's what it is. We're just trying to find fulfillment and happiness and whatever, or, like you guys have been saying, like dealing with some internal demons or trauma. And maybe that helps, and for the time, or not permanently, but for the time being. And if we can help somebody find those things, happiness, fulfillment, all somewhere else, they'd prefer something else, right? And
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good
That's
point.
a great story.
Yeah.
It's really a great
That's
illustration.
so true. That's so true.
yeah. So do you, as somebody who dealt with addiction, would you? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. I could use us as an example. I mean, the home that he grew up in, he doesn't have that tendency to get addicted to any substance, anything. Me, on the other hand, I have to be careful because we grew up in totally different environments. His parents were home. His mom was home all the time.
Strong Christian
Strong
family,
Christian family. They were sat around the table eating with each other. Ours was everyone's on their own.
meals, you know.
You know, what's it called? Every man is on his own, or something like that. So it totally makes sense. Totally makes sense.
Well, even that little thing of eating together, right? It's funny because growing up, that was something my parents were. So my parents, coming from Portugal, we kind of, we moved it to a town because, like you were saying before, it's not easy to come legally to the country. So you had to have sponsors and show that you're work and you're going to participate in society. So we came to a very Portuguese community here where my parents had some family here who would give them work or whatever. And some of those values, I feel like, it's so common with immigrants where like they get so caught up in the journey of financially getting ahead that some of those values get left behind. You realize like
Mm,
you weren't that unhappy back in Portugal living on a
Yeah.
farm with no running water because you had family, you had friends. Maybe you didn't have a TV, maybe you didn't have a car, but you got like every time I would go back to Portugal, people seemed pretty happy and people seemed, and they didn't have any of the things that, we had here. And but but one thing growing up that was always important to my mother was dinner, right? So it's like if I
Mm.
got a F on a report card, like I wasn't as afraid at getting yelled at as missing dinner or being late to dinner. Like dinner, and I'm always like, what is the big deal? Like I'll warm it up when I get home, And now, like I see it with my family where it's like nobody eats alone. We always eat together,
Yeah.
good for you.
and to me, like my wife works in the restaurant business, and sometimes she comes home late, and I'll wait to eat with her. And my mother will be like, "Why are you eating so late in the day?" Because and I'm like, because I don't want her to eat alone, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's the way I am, and I'm like, it's kind of lonely eating alone. It's like,
Right.
and which sounds weird. It's lonely to eat alone, but it is one of those things where like it can either be just something you do just to put calories in your body, or it can be a time to be social, and talk and eat. In Europe, dinner is hours, and
Yeah.
you take
It's a major event.
it's a major event. You take time. Like I'll have friends and we'll take them to a Portuguese restaurant in town, and they'll be like, "Wow, the food's taking forever." I'm like, another bottle of wine, some more bread. Like I'm like, we'll make the time go by. I'm like, this isn't supposed to be, McDonald's where it's fast food. I'm like, you're supposed to sit here, we talk, we socialize. Next thing you know, the food's in front of you. You're eating. Next thing you know, it's midnight. So I'm like,
Mm.
that's the way life should be. We should. And when you think historically, right, when we're hunter gatherers, probably we all looked forward to like surviving so we could eat that big meal at the end of the day around the fire with our family and friends. Like that was something that's probably so deep rooted in our DNA that it's something spiritual, it's something beautiful, and the just something that you shared with your tribe and your community, and all these things I think contribute to the decay of society is
Hmm.
how they look at family as like, hey, it's just something. If you want, great. If you don't want, no big deal. Family dinners, no big deal. Like just eat on the go. Hey, there's your food in the microwave. There's your food. Just get something on your drive or whatever. All these little things, I think, are contributing to our larger problems.
Oh,
I
for
totally agree.
sure.
And I
Totally
have to
agree.
say that a lot of it I firmly believe, and I believe I can speak for Bersabeh as well, have been intentional. I mean,
Yeah, for
the
sure.
the degradation of
Hmm.
religion, which you mentioned, the degradation of the family unit,
Hmm.
going all the way back to the women's liberation movement, where there started to be this indoctrination that it was not it was not esteemed to be a
Yeah,
stay-at-home mom.
sure.
It was
Yeah,
you had to get a good job with a good salary, and you had to compete with men
career.
and
Yeah.
have a career, and all of those things started dividing the family unit. And then you fast forward to today, and this may be controversial for some, but nonetheless, you've got now the LGBTQ, which can't reproduce. You've got gay marriage, which can't reproduce. You've got all these people who are into eugenics saying that we've got to depopulate the planet, even though the planet is already depopulating itself. It's a fact, if you look at the statistics, that childbearing is on a massive decline
Yeah.
across the world. And so, consequently, it's been very methodical and it's been very covert for a long time. And it's just seemed to be more overt in the last 4 years because, quite frankly, in my observation, Trump wasn't supposed to win in 2016. They thought they were on plan, and we were going to go to war, and all of a sudden he did win, and he set the whole plan off by 4 years, and so they had to scramble to get caught up and to get back on track. And so now they're really scrambling because he wasn't supposed to win again, and he did win. And they're fighting him tooth and nail. If you pay attention to what's
Yeah.
going on, not the least of which one easy example I gave you was Biden saying, "Hey, I'm going to pass this law where everyone can work from home because we've already heard that the Department of Government Efficiency is going to make them come into work." And everybody's just gruntled because 1% of the people come to work. And yet, guess who's paying for them? We are. We're paying their salaries.
And we're social creatures. I think there's also a easy way to manipulate, control, and push propaganda onto people when they're at home by
Yeah.
themselves. They can just go online in an echo chamber, and they're not working with people who might have different views, different perspectives, get their news from different places. I think that's a part of it too. When you saw COVID, when that was happening, I think the whole isolation type thing, which to me is torture, because I mean, you've been in prison, like that's how you torture somebody who's been misbehaving. You put them by themselves, and we were
Right.
accepting, mass torturing of society, and then
Yeah.
it also stopped us from sharing ideas and thoughts, and um, you put together a team and you put people together. Like a lot of times you bounce ideas off one another. But if you're by yourself, you can kind of convince yourself of anything, right? You can.
Right.
Yeah.
I do that when I'm with my friends, where sometimes I have this view on something that's happening in the world, and I'm like, I can't wait to get together with some guys and or have a guest on where I can bounce this off them because I'm not certain if I'm right or not. And then I'm like, oh, I haven't thought about it that way. But if you don't ever do that, if you just isolate people by themselves, and the only interaction with anybody else is on TV with CNN telling you be afraid, and showing you these videos of Chinese people dying in the streets, which nobody ever explained what happened and how come that didn't happen anywhere else. And
Hmm.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's wild. We were openly lied to, but like you said, the fear is it's problem, reaction, solution, right? It's like
Right.
it's all about, you create a problem, and then it's like, hey, we can get you out of this. You want your life back? Take this vaccine. Take,
Yeah.
Right.
just take this remedy. We have, the how you we'll have the solution to your problems, and it's the same thing with terrorism, right? Like during after the Iraq after September 11th, they sold us Iraq, the Iraq War. Why? Because it was like, we had the code red, code orange. Some people might be too young to even remember this, but like they were scaring us every day. We had,
Hmm.
like code red warning, code orange warning. We had anthrax in the mail, all this stuff. And people were so afraid that they reacted by saying like, hey, I don't know what Iraq has to do with September 11th, but if it gives us normal back, let's do it. Let's go in there and fight terrorism,
Yeah.
even though they don't tell you when, we referenced the Iran-Iraq war. Like we were all for supporting Iraq when they're fighting Iran, but now we don't like Iraq when they don't play ball. And that's what it's all about. It's always about, are you doing business with us or are you not? Because we don't care morally if you're a good person or not, right? I mean, we do business with Saudi Arabia, and they have Sharia law. We don't care about their, moral issues, right? So
Yeah.
it's obvious that it's like everything's a business. It's like that movie Network. I used to love that movie. It's like the world is a business. Everything's about deals and resources, and everything you see on TV is just made up, and it's a lie, and it's a fabrication. And that's where like Trump was kind of different, because it's like, okay, you don't like him, but at least you know who he is. Like
Right.
Yeah.
all these other politicians that you do like, that's not even them.
Mm.
That's their speechwriters and their team saying this is what they want to hear. This is the
Right.
persona that they want. Like it's all fake. So it's like, even though he wasn't perfect, I think a lot of people found a appeal with him, because it's like, I'm tired of the cookie cutter fake persona. And I also think that's why podcasts have gotten big, because people are hearing organic conversations, people are hearing real stories, people, and when the world's full of propaganda and fake, personalities, and everybody has an agenda and trying to sell you something, they're just looking for something organic.
Right.
Yeah. I think they're looking for something real.
Really, really well stated.
Yeah. Really well stated.
And
And
again, it's smart if the evil forces would take some of the smart technique. I used to say this to guys in prison. There were guys in prison they would tell me how they pulled off these crimes, and I would just be blown away. by the stories of how creative they were to steal cars or to do this or do that. And I used to say to them all the time, if you would take that creativity and point it in a positive and productive
Yeah.
direction, you would be a really well contributor to society. And I would say the same thing for a lot of the dark forces in our world today. If you would take some of that creativity and instead of pointing it in a nefarious direction, in a self-centered direction, point it to contribution and morality. I mean, we could really do some things here in the world. And that's our hope and that's our prayer, is that those things are starting to turn around. I do believe that God and goodness always win in the end. It sometimes takes a long time, but
It's just gonna get messy first.
it has to get messy first.
Yeah. Well, to bring together both of your experiences, um, one had a issue with addiction, another one, you had your own personal journey going to prison, but before that, you were, rich and you're well off and all these things. Sometimes when we talk about the elite, the Bill Gates, the Soros, the people who are influencing society, how much of that is like, you've scratched every itch you could scratch. You've run out of things. It's like that quote, satisfaction is the death of desire. It's like you've run out of things that that are desirable. You've been satisfied by. You've already bought the nicest car. You've been to the most exotic island. You've had all this stuff. And from like a addict's perspective, like, okay, what's the next thing? How do I get the next high? Do you think some of it is psychological, where it's like, hey, like I can have every beautiful girl, I can have every whatever, but now like controlling society, that gives them the biggest high. Like having a influence on the world to that extent, like where you can convince everybody to wear a mask and lock down and take this experimental vaccine. Do you think that that's some of the psychology behind what they're doing?
I
Oh
do,
yeah.
because I think there's a hunger. One of my, I've had several great mentors, and one of them was a Zen master, the highest ranking Zen master outside of Japan, and he was a great friend and support
Mm,
during the whole catastrophe that I went through. But in the Buddhist tradition, in Zen, they call it the hungry ghost. And it's a great metaphor, because if you can imagine a ghost that's transparent and it's constantly hungry and it's constantly eating, but it never gets full because there's nothing that holds it. It just continues to eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. And that's the hungry ghost. And I think that's what happens. That's why I talk about this in God, Money, and Sex. Human trafficking and pedophilia, which is horrific, is a $150 billion business in the U.S. alone, for God's sakes, and human trafficking and all these things. Well, where do you go when you've had every single beautiful woman that you can imagine, and it's
yeah.
not enough. It's not enough anymore. Or when you've bought every car and every house, and now you've got 7 houses and you've got 30, elite watches or whatever, and it's never enough. And it's the hungry ghost that just keeps saying, if I can have more and more and more and more power, it's going to satisfy this emptiness within me. But I can promise you, it won't, because I went down that path for a time. Certainly not to those extremes, but having all the supreme watches and numerous cars and 7 properties and all these kinds of things, thinking,
Yeah.
it was really easy to rationalize and justify those things in my mind, that there was a good reason that I was doing this. It was a good investment or whatever. But the reality was, it was a hungry ghost. It was just an unsatisfied and unable to satisfy appetite that never ends. And that's where when I stood in the desert in 2013, and I really did a deep dive into myself and said, what's the next chapter of my life going to be? I realized I'm not going down that road again. I'm just not. I'm going to know who I am, regardless of what other people think of me, because I had a lot of haters and a lot of attackers. And I'm going to have a relationship with God, and I'm going to make that
Mm,
most important. and I'm going to realize that that power of God is a greater power working through me than any power that could come from me, if that makes sense to
And
you.
I think that's the key point right there. Even all these people that you just mentioned, the so-called elites, they start thinking or they start believing that they are in the power position, that they can play God, meaning the power is coming from them. And that's where people make the mistake. Even getting in a high, you're chasing that feeling of that godlike feeling. And so when you could come back to go, oh, this isn't me, this is a power that is God that's working through me. And then when you do that, I mean, your whole life changes. There is no, and I will tell you that if you come from that position and you can see that and accept it and actually experientially feel and live from that day to day, it's a far more powerful feeling than any of these elites will ever feel in their life.
And I don't even like to call them elites because
Yeah.
to me they're not very elite. They're pretty
They're evil.
they're aberrant and they're arrested in their development, quite frankly. They're evil, because life always wants more life.
Yeah, they're pro-death.
Life always wants more life. And
Mhm.
if anyone who doesn't want more life is not full of life
No,
because that's what life wants.
that's why they have to take it from other people.
Right.
Well, that's it's something I say all the time. You know, that quote, the biggest trick, the greatest trick that the devil ever played was convincing you that he doesn't exist. And I say the same thing about the rulers, the elite, or whatever term you want to use. I'm like, you look at since the beginning of time, there's always been people and people who've wanted to rule those people. And
Mhm.
now we think in present day, it's the one time throughout all of human history that we don't have people trying to rule others. So it's like, it's that trick. It's like they played the greatest trick ever played, that they've convinced you that they don't exist. It's about democracy. You have control. You have the
Mhm.
power of your own destiny. And the truth is, they still exist and they're still trying to control us, but they've convinced us they don't. And the title of your book is interesting because there's a story that a friend of mine, this Portuguese guy, would tell you, and about time, money, and sex. And he's like, the universe will never give you too much of a good thing. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, when you're young, he's like, you have time and you have sex. And he's like, but you don't have money. And then when you're midlife, he's like, you have money and you have sex, but you don't have time because you're busy. You're building your business. You're doing your things. You're following your career. And he's like, and then when you're old, you have money and you have time because you've retired, but you don't have sex. He's like,
That's right.
and it's like, and it's a funny story because it's like, oh, when you really think about it, you're like, you're kind of right. They never, it's like, it's almost like they will balance the universe balances everything out where you don't get too much of a good thing. You don't take anything for granted. But let's get into your book and what inspired you guys to write it. Some of, the things people can expect from it, and what else you want to expand on.
Sure.
Well, I love your story, and the title is actually God, Money, and Sex. And we call those the three human dilemmas. And so, just to encapsulate, God is one of the major dilemmas because we've gotten so far away from God. If you look at humanity, or every living entity needs a hierarchy. Even a wolf pack has a hierarchy. We all need a hierarchy. We need somewhere to go for our truth and for our answers. And historically, that has been God. Well, what started happening around the 17th century was the whole what's called the Enlightenment, which I think was the de-enlightenment in many ways, but it was the humanistic movement started to come into the fore, and we started to move ourselves more from our right intuitive brain, feminine receptive kind of brain, uh, to the left brain, which is logical and rational. And we started to move ourselves away from God, and many began to become so rational that they thought, as Bersabeh mentioned earlier, that it was silly to believe in God because you can't really prove it, you can't see it, and so consequently it started to deteriorate. In the book, we call that hierarchy the vertical principle. And that's a metaphor because Christ said the kingdom of heaven is within. It's not in the clouds somewhere. But if you can follow the metaphor, there's this vertical principle where we have to go to find out what's moral and what's right and what's virtuous. And if we don't have that, if that becomes disconnected, then we have what we call the horizontal principle, which is a secular world. And with a lack of a hierarchy, a vertical hierarchy, call it God, then the only way we can figure out what's right, wrong, virtuous, or principled is to look around us. And so what's happening in the world today? Well, how many people have lied under oath in front of Congress?
Yep.
There's a number of people. You can't even count how many people have been caught lying under oath. Anthony Fauci has changed his story so many times, he can't even keep it straight. And yet nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. There were so many counts of perjury in my trial. Nothing happened. I guess perjury is not a crime anymore. It's supposed to be imprisonment crime. And yet, if you look at a younger generation that's disconnected from this vertical principle, this vertical hierarchy, they look around and they go, okay, lying's not a big deal because there's no accountability for it. So what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal because it's not true. And anything that is not truth is an absolute lie. And so that's the God piece of it. And that's where we've talked to that here today. Bersabeh, getting back to center, in the ancient traditions, they say that the heart is the throne of God. And coming back to center and operating from that place is where we come back to our moral principles. And I'll just say this as a parenthetical, is that one of the big problems we have in our world today, I'll say in our country today, is that this country was founded on Christian principles. That's inarguable. You look at the Constitution, it mentions God how many times? It was founded on Christian principles, and yet we don't have a Christian nation anymore. So we have a constitutional republic that has a document that is the law founded on Christian principles, but we have a nation that's no longer Christian. And so consequently, there's a disconnect here. And in our morality and our virtues and our principles are all out of whack. So that's the God piece, and I get much more in detail into it in the book. Money has become our God. We have knelt at the altar and worshiped at the altar of money and materialism for so long that becomes everything. If you look at, Joe Biden, 20 business accounts that are getting money from other countries when he's vice president. Well, what services are you providing, Mr. Biden? Because that's treason. And yet we have all that documented. And so consequently, it's all driven by money. You got Nancy Pelosi is worth how many millions of dollars? Yeah. And she makes about $200,000 a year or a little bit less. Do the math. How does that work? And so it's all driven by money and greed and power. And most people don't understand money. The problem with money is that money is an idea. It's not, what we call U.S. dollars. It's not even a U.S. dollar. Look at it. It says Federal Reserve Note. Every single supposed U.S. dollar you have in your pocket is a symbol of debt. Mm-hmm. Because it's been printed off by the Federal Reserve, separate entity, which charges interest on it. And so consequently, when every time you pull out your cash, you're showing how much debt you're carrying in your pocket and how many trillions of dollars. We've incurred more debt in the last 4 years than I think we incurred in the 20 years prior because we don't understand money. And we don't understand how it works. And it creates a tremendous amount of fear and a tremendous amount of greed. And then finally, there's sex. And sex, we say, is an acronym for Sacred Energy Exchange. It's a sacred act. Sex is made for two reasons, for reproduction and for worship. And I know that sounds illogical to a lot of people, that's meant to be between a committed couple, and that's how it was created, between a committed couple, a married couple, to either procreate, because that's, we've been told we're created in the image and the likeness of God. And so we have the ability. You had a daughter walk in, you created a human being, for God's sakes, with your wife. How amazing is that? It really
Yeah.
is unfathomable, and we tend to forget how amazing that really is. But you created a human being, so that's that God power working through you, and yet it's become bastardized. If you look
Yeah.
at the number, the high, and I quote all these things in the book, and I'm not pulling up the exact percentage, but a huge percentage of the American population pulls up porn 2 or 3 times a week, a massive percentage. And that's causing problems as well, particularly in younger generations, because the younger generations don't have to court, they don't have to talk, they don't have to go on dates, they don't have to do the things that we all do to build a relationship, and therefore they don't have the ability to build a relationship. Bersabeh and
Yeah.
I talk to business owners who hire people in the younger generation, and they say these people can talk on Zoom, but you get them in front of you, and they can't even make eye contact because we've gotten so disconnected and so much become an AI. We're worried about AI. Well, most of us are AI. We can't set down that phone that's our hand is just automatically built to hold it, and we're constantly living in that phone, in that artificial intelligence, in an artificial world. And then we've got the pedophilia, we've got the human trafficking, we've got all these things that are going on with sex, and it's been totally misused and totally bastardized. And so those are the three human dilemmas. And what we talk about is how to understand them and how to master them and how to get us back to God and get us back to center and get us back to where we need to be to build a virtuous and principled life.
Yeah, no, that's great because it is something, and it sucks because we live in a world where um they're trying to sexualize children and they're force feeding the weirdest of things. You can't turn on the TV or watch a Disney movie or anything without having to answer some really awkward questions to your kids because they're just seeing stuff that they shouldn't be seeing at that age. And and the crazy thing is it's such a small percentage of society. It's like if media and TV should reflect the majority of society, what they're doing is they're making the minority of society look like the majority of society. Because if every show I watch, there's a gay couple or a trans, group of friends or whatever, it's like
Well,
it starts molding your worldview where you start thinking like, oh, this is the norm. This is, this must be everywhere, and it's completely normal when it's really just a small percentage of society. And because it's a small percentage of society, and they're force feeding you it goes into like this isn't accidental. They're obviously pushing it for a reason. And
oh, for sure.
and this, and the child trafficking thing. I mean, I've done so many shows on this topic. This is, I've had what's his name, wrote the Franklin scandal on a bunch. Whitney Webb's a friend of mine. She's been on back in the day talking about Epstein before Epstein was a household name. Like this has been happening forever, and people should be concerned. And the stuff that's going on in your backyard in your local high school or local middle school with a lot of the teachers watching porn and
Mm-hmm.
teachers making kids feel uncomfortable or whatever. This stuff is going on everywhere, and people should, really don't. And this goes into what you talked about in your book. Like money should be just a means to an end, right?
Right,
Life shouldn't revolve around it. You should work to live. You shouldn't live to work, right?
right,
And it's just one of those things where like people get so caught up in, hey, I'm being a good parent if I work 80 hours a week and I, work overtime and I give them a big house and a private school. But the truth is like that child needs you more than they need the money.
Yeah.
And if you're not around them and if you're not having a influence on their worldview. If you're not there to answer the questions that they certainly will have because they're little people who are trying to understand the world around them, then somebody else is going to answer those questions and somebody else is going to have a influence on them. And I remember talking to this guy once where he talked about his how he lost his daughter. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, she went to college and, she's like completely, she won't talk to us. She's like a completely different worldview and political view and this and that. He's like, and I can't get through to her, this and that. And I know this guy. And I'm like, this guy worked his whole life. He'd never spent any time at home with his daughter. I'm like, so what was happening was he wasn't having these conversations, that one-on-one time where you're helping mold their worldview, answering their questions. So who knows what was, influencing her or what was motivating her or molding her worldview. And now by the time you figured out that like she went in the complete opposite direction, it was too late. Like she's been
Right.
kind of lost, So, it's so important for people to be involved in their kids' lives. Unschooling. Carrie McDonald's an author who wrote the unschooling book about when your kids come home from school. Like, ask them questions. Try to figure out what they were told. What teachers could be planting seeds about. You don't even know. But a lot of times, kids won't talk about it. They're innocent. They don't know that if they're told, "Hey, do you feel like the opposite sex today?" That there are some evil intentions, behind that. So it's like ask those questions and then maybe unschool them if you need to.
Right.
We do live in we're in the midst of a spiritual battle, and I even think even with I had this guy on, Michael Millerman, who was the first person to translate Alexander Dugin's books, and he got fired because of it. But Alexander Dugin, some people might know him as, like, they call him Putin's brain, but he's a philosopher, a very philosopher, and he talks about modernity and all this type of stuff. And just I find it fascinating. I don't agree with everything, but I think it's important to explore all ideas and philosophies and opinions. And one thing that I do connect with is this idea of maybe the hatred of Russia from the West isn't so much about resources or military or maybe it's more spiritual, because they are one of the few countries that I think 80% of them are Orthodox Christians.
That's right.
They have they very much push back against Western culture. At the moment, my country, Portugal, is humiliating how they've just them, France, all the Western European countries are just like, yeah, give us your transgender ideologies and and all that type of stuff, and really don't push back at all. And then you look at Russia, kind of makes sense because they do push back on that type of stuff. They do seem to have more old school conservative values. So, I mean, do you guys think there's anything to that?
I think there's a lot to it. Isn't it interesting
You touched on something he's been talking about.
that it's always Russia? I mean, the fact is China is much bigger of a problem than Russia is. China is communistic, and that's pretty well known. And they have a lot to do with the whole fentanyl and what's coming into this country. They've got their hands in
The virus.
Biden's pocket. They were involved in the virus, all those kinds of things. And yet, why is it? And they produce more pollution in China than every other country on the planet combined. And yet, nobody pushes against them. Why is that?
It's Russia's fault.
It's always Russia's fault. And so I totally feel like you're on point. And I've seen Putin talk. The man, I can't imagine how patient he is, because it's pretty well proven and known that we blew up his pipeline, and yet he didn't retaliate. Now, there's got to be something going on. He's a smart guy, and he's not a pushover. And so there's got to be some reasons why. And I hope to God that there's a good plan put together. And supposedly, he and Trump have a really great relationship. And he's already come out and said that he's willing to talk to Trump about peace deals. And so I think it'll be very fascinating to see how that unfolds. But I've seen him give a lot of speeches where he is just totally slamming on how degraded the American people have become morally,
It's
and
embarrassing.
it's embarrassing. It
Yeah.
literally is embarrassing.
Yeah, I mean, we should be celebrating mothers who want to be the nurturers and be an important part of raising a child. We should be celebrating masculinity and men being
Mhm.
strong and tough. Like these aren't bad things. And you know what? If a girl wanted to be into sports, we just called them a tomboy. We didn't tell them like, hey, how about you surgically get a penis attached and
Right.
hey, you're just into things that, for the most part, more boys are into. But it didn't mean you had to change your whole persona or you had
Yeah.
some gender issue. Same thing with like friends that were more into arts, right? I had friends that weren't into sports. They were more into music and artistic stuff, creative things. So it's like, and I dibble dabbled in both, communities. So it's like I could see that where like, yeah, that's not, that doesn't mean you have to change your gender. But the Russia thing is interesting because it's a question that I've asked a lot myself. It's like, why always Russia? It can't be as simple as just resources and that type of thing. The typical geopolitical motivations. I think it's deeper, and I think they've pushed back against a lot of the Western ideologies, and they that definitely could be a motivation. And Alexander Dugan, if people look into some of his work, and Michael Millerman, they highlight this, and they and I think it's something worth entertaining. But I know I've taken up a lot of your guys' time, and I can't thank you guys enough for coming on and chatting for as long as you did. I really, really appreciate it. I can't wait to share this conversation and your own personal stories with the listeners. But for people listening who want to keep up with your work, want to get the book, what's all the best places to keep up with you guys and get the book?
Well, we actually have a gift that we love to give to your viewers, and they can find everything there as well. But
The book, yeah.
our company, the book as well, and as well as the audio book. But our company name is Harmonic Wealth Global, and if I may define that real quickly, just humor me. Most people think wealth is money, but if you trace the etymology of the word wealth back to its origins, it literally translates as
Well-being.
well-being. And so Bersabeh and I work with a lot of people who have a lot of money, but they're not very wealthy because they don't have well-being. And so Harmonic Wealth Global is our company, and it's harmony and well-being, and it's harmonicwealthglobal.com. And if they'll go to /freedom, then we have a free download, a freedom blueprint, which talks about God, money, and sex, and has some real probing questions on where you are
Mhm.
in spectrum to all of those three areas, those three dilemmas, and hopefully you can do some good soul searching on that. And then of course the book is available there, and the audio book is available there as well. So just harmonicwealthglobal.com /freedom.
Yeah.
Awesome. And are you guys on? I know you guys are on Instagram, and you said it's Shadow Ban.
X.
Yes.
Yeah. We're
Yeah,
Shadowband.
we had
You
we're
could follow us, but you'll probably never
yeah,
see our post.
James A. Ray on X, and Bersabeh Ray, just Bersabeh Ray.
Yeah, Bersabeh Ray.
Bersabeh Ray on X, and
Yeah.
then we have a joint account on Instagram because they shut mine down. It's
James and Bear Ray.
James and Bear
Yeah.
Ray, and we're on LinkedIn and all those other platforms too.
Yeah.
Facebook.
Yeah,
Awesome.
but thanks for having us on, Ricky. This was really good, and keep doing what you're doing because we need people like you to get the message out and keep people awake and hopefully wake them up from the main media streams for sure.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. So keep doing great work.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I get as much out of these conversations as the listeners do. I always say it's a journey for everybody involved. Everybody kind of
Yeah.
gets something out of it. So I can't thank you guys enough for sharing your personal stories and your journey with everybody. And I'll send you guys the links to the show
Yes.
once it's up and live, and you can share it and post it anywhere. All my stuff's open source. It's just about getting the conversations out there. I don't care who gets the clicks, so people can post it and share it anywhere. And enjoy the rest of your night and weekend. I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we talk again in the near future.
Yeah,
Okay,
for
we'll look
sure.
forward to
Thank
that.
you.
God bless. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care.